Alright, Logic fans, welcome back to our third and final video on section 1.8. Section 1.8 ends with a discussion of a really important idea that's just really important for all future work. So let's make sure we go over this well. And we'll see that this important notion ties back into the 5 fundamental forms defined in section 1.7. So that's going to be coming back here. Okay. Pick a proposition out of a hat. Okay, let's suppose you picked out, here's a proposition, you just pulled that out of a hat. Here's another one. Just pulled that out of a hat, all right? Any proposition you pull out of a hat can be categorized into one of 6 different types, okay? So we're going to go over these 6 different types, and it's a really simple idea, okay? So a proposition is a negation. Proposition is of the type negation, all right, if and only if its main connective is tilde. So this is a really interesting idea, but the main connective of this proposition is wedge. The main connective of this proposition is ampersand. Therefore, neither of these are negations, all right? Neither of these propositions are of this type, okay? But, a proposition like this is of that type, okay? In other words, this proposition is a negation. Why? Because its main connective is this, right? And in fact, here's a new proposition I just pulled out of a hat. Is it a negation? Yes, absolutely. It is a negation. Why? Because its main connective is tilde, namely that one right there, okay? So one of the things we can do is we can sort of really quickly define 5 different types. There's going to be 6 total, but for now, we can define 5 different types of propositions in this really easy way that mimics the definition we gave for negation. And all 5 together look like this. Okay, so all of our types of propositions can be sort of defined this way, all right? And the definition of each is basically the same as what it was for negation. So negation was a proposition is negation if and only if its main connective is tilde. Well, if its main connective is ampersand, then it's a conjunction. If its main connective is or, then it's a disjunction. If its main connective is arrow, then it's a conditional. Then and only then is it a conditional. If its main connective is tribar, then and only then is it a biconditional. Okay, so very simple and easy, but we're using this concept of the main connective to sort of categorize, classify all of our propositions into different types. So let's do an exercise real quick to make sure we're on the same page. Okay, so take a look at these. Now go through each one, A, B, C, D, and E, and for each of the propositions, identify what type of proposition it is. Is it a negation? Is it a disjunction? What is it? Pause now. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to work through these, but let's go ahead and do them together. So this right here is, A is a conjunction, and it's a conjunction because its main connective is and, right? And this is the main connective, right? That's what you would have identified just by looking at it. So it's a conjunction. The main connective of B is this, therefore it's a disjunction. The main connective of this is and, therefore it's a conjunction. The main connective of D is this, which means it's a negation, okay? And the main connective of F is this, which means it's a conditional, okay? So that's really easy. And if I had one, let's see, just to make sure we do an example of each one for you. If I had something like this, then the main connective of this proposition would be the tribar, and therefore it would be classified as of the type biconditional. Okay, that's a biconditional. Now, interestingly, we can get at the exact same thing through a different way of looking at it, through a different sort of lens. Okay, that is to say, we can define negation, conjunction, disjunction, conditional, the same concepts in a different way. This is probably the easier way, but it's important for you to see this. So let me show you a different way of approaching it that gets you the same results. Okay, so an alternative way of defining the same concepts, negation, conjunction, disjunction. Okay, so this is a conjunction. Forgot to do this here, but this is a conjunction, this is a negation, this is a disjunction, this is conditional. It's exact same concepts. Okay, these overlap completely, and there's something kind of interesting here. So you can identify a proposition by saying, oh, okay, its main connective is negation, its main connective is disjunction, therefore it's a disjunction. Alternatively, you can look at what's it a substitution instance of. In particular, is it a substitution instance of a fundamental form? So if it's a substitution instance of fundamental form 1, and remember, we defined the fundamental forms in the previous section 1.7, and that would be video 1.7c. So be sure to check that out if you're confused here. But if you're a substitution instance of fundamental form 1, which was this form, fundamental form, okay? If you're a substitution instance of that, then and only then are you a negation, right? So for example, let's go ahead and take a look at this. Notice that D here, okay? So D is a substitution instance of this form. Therefore, D is a negation, as we saw before, and its main connective, so defined this way, is tilde. So you can define these either way, okay? And that's the point. And if you're a substitution instance of fundamental form, sorry, I forgot to change these, fundamental form 2, fundamental form 3, fundamental form 4, or if you're a substitution instance of fundamental form 5, then and only then are you a biconditional, right? So E here, notice its main connective, so defined this way, is tribar, therefore it's a biconditional. But if we were to define it this way, a biconditional, it means you're a substitution instance of fundamental form 5, then notice this would be the value of P here, and not C would be the value of Q. And so this proposition is indeed a substitution instance of fundamental form 5, and therefore this proposition is, by this way of defining things, a biconditional. So these definitions, these different ways of defining it completely overlap, okay, is the point. But why did we bother calling things in section 1.7 the 5 fundamental forms? Why were we concerned about those ones? Well, the idea might be fairly intuitive at this point, but let's put the point this way. Every proposition, every single proposition that is, so your professor pulls a proposition out of a hat at random, any old proposition he puts out, every proposition falls into one of these 5 types with a slight qualification, okay? So actually, let's do this as an exercise. If I said every proposition has exactly one of these 5 types, or is exactly one of these 5 types, 5 types being negation, conjunction, disjunction, conditional, and biconditional. Every proposition is exactly one of these 5 types. Okay, this assertion is technically false, okay? There's a slight exception to it. So see if you can find out what I'm getting at here. What is the slight exception to this? Pause now. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to think about it, but you could have, for example, a proposition like, let's do this one. Let's do capital A. Okay, so this proposition is, of course, not of any of these types, and yet it's a proposition. So this proposition doesn't fit this description, right? It's not one of these 5. So what we have to do to account for cases like this is we have to add one more, and we'll say that a proposition is brute if and only if it is not a substitution. So if and only if it has no main connective, but if and only if it is not a substitution instance of any fundamental form. Fundamental form. So I'm going to define this for you, and then hopefully we can pull it all up here. So let's define it this way. Perfect. So a proposition is brute, like this proposition, for example, is brute if and only if it is not a substitution instance of any fundamental form. That is to say, alternatively defined, if and only if it has no main connective. Okay, so now with these 6 here, a proposition is exactly, every proposition is exactly one of these 6 types. That's true. Okay, that's a true claim. So that's the fundamental idea here. All right, you pick a proposition out of a hat, and it's going to be a substitution instance of one of these types. So it's going to be a substitution instance of one of these types, or else it's not going to be a substitution instance of one of those types. Okay, and that is going to hold for every possible proposition. And so, we defined fundamental form 1, fundamental form 2, fundamental form 3. We were saying these are the fundamental forms, not P and Q, P or Q, because of this idea that every proposition is going to be one of these 6 types, where we add the brute type to account for things like capital A. But we could alternatively say something like, let's do it this way. Every proposition with at least one connective is exactly one of these 5 types, where I'm excluding this now. Okay, so this is true. Every proposition with at least one connective is exactly one of these types. Okay, and so that means that you pull a proposition out of a hat at random, and either it's going to be one of these, and whichever one it is, it's not any of the others. It's guaranteed to be one, and it's guaranteed to be only one of those 5. Now, why am I emphasizing this so much? Because it's super important for your future work. Okay, you need to stop now and learn this, and learn it well. Do the practice problems, because all of our future work, all right, particularly when we get into quantificational logic starting in chapter 4, is going to require you to be able to look at a proposition. Okay, just your professor pulls a proposition out of a hat. Okay, maybe it's that one, and you need to instantly be able to look at that and say that's a disjunction. Okay, and until you've acquired that skill, you really shouldn't move on. You should be able to sort of diagnose it immediately. One way of explaining why this is so important is that as we get into quantificational logic starting in chapter 4, we're going to add some types. So you're going to have the negations, the conjunctions, the disjunctions, the conditionals, but you're also going to have what we're calling universally quantified sentences and existentially quantified sentences. And being able to identify immediately what type of sentence you're looking at is going to tell you what kinds of things you can and can't do to it. Analogously, right, in mathematics, if you look at a function, okay, and you want to know what you can and can't do with it, well, it's going to turn out to be really, really important that you can identify what kind of function you're looking at, right? So, for example, if you're looking at a function like this, okay, you can do certain kinds of things for it. So in calculus, if you want to be able to differentiate a function, well, a certain kind of differentiation rule is going to apply to a function of this type, and a function of a different type, like this. Okay, let's say it's I don't know, let's just pick something really, really easy. Okay, functions of this type you have to apply a different type of rule with. Okay, or if you're doing integrals, identifying the type of function you're looking at is important. Similarly, in logic, being able to identify the type of proposition that you're looking at is absolutely crucial, because the type is going to indicate what kinds of things you can and cannot do to the sentence. All right, logic fans, that's it for this. Make sure you're doing the practice problems, and we'll see you in the next video when we start chapter 2.